Look at a map of the United Kingdom right now. Find it on a world map, that small island off the northwest coast of Europe. Now look at where it sits on the latitude lines. That spot, the one that looks like it should be frozen solid, sits at the same latitude as Hudson Bay in Canada, a body of water locked in ice for half the year. But the United Kingdom is not frozen. Palm trees grow in Scotland. London is warmer in January than Montreal. And that is only the first thing the map is hiding. The rock underneath Scotland is so old it formed before animals existed. There is a wave in England that surfers ride upstream, inland, every single week. There is a currency being handed across shop counters today that is older than the Norman conquest. And the rules for almost every sport the planet plays were written on this one small island. And the strangest part is that none of this is hidden away in some archive. It is all sitting in plain sight on the beaches, in the pockets, on the road signs, right there on the map you are looking at. You just were never told what you were looking at. 44 facts are waiting. The country you think you know is not the country we are about to describe. Fact 1. The United Kingdom covers 244,376 square kilometers. That makes it smaller than the single U.S. state of Oregon. Now hold those two places side by side. Oregon has about 4.2 million residents. The UK has about 67 million. That is 16 times more people, packed into a space that is actually a little smaller. 16 times the human life in less than the room. The map draws the UK as a major country, and an influence it is. But in raw ground, it is a small, crowded island. Everything else you are about to hear happens inside that footprint. Keep the size in mind. It is going to keep surprising you. Fact 2. London sits at 51.5 degrees north. That puts it further north than nearly every major Canadian city. Calgary, a place most people file under cold northern city, sits at 51 degrees north. London is north of that. Edinburgh sits at almost 56 degrees north, which puts it further north than Moscow at 55.75. Read that again. Edinburgh is north of Moscow. The United Kingdom is not a southern, temperate country by any honest measure of the globe. By latitude, it is a northern country that simply refuses to behave like one. Fact 3. The most northerly point of the United Kingdom is not even on the mainland. It is a small rock called Outstack off the northern tip of Shetland, and it sits at 60.85 degrees north. That is further north than Oslo, the capital of Norway. It is further north than most of the populated parts of Alaska. The UK pushes far, far higher into the Arctic latitudes than the little island on the map ever lets you feel. Its top edge is brushing the same lines as places people think of as genuinely polar. Fact 4. The classic tip-to-tip journey, Land's End in Cornwall to John O'Groats in Scotland, runs roughly 874 miles by road. That is the whole country, southern toe to northern head. And the entire thing, every mile of it, would fit comfortably inside the state of Texas with a huge amount of room to spare. The idea of the UK as a country of enormous consequence keeps running into the reality of its actual size. It is not big. It never was big. That is part of what makes the rest of this list strange. Fact 5. No point in England is more than 70 miles from the sea. And the coastline is so folded and intricate that wherever you stand, you are never much more than an hour's drive from tidal water. Being truly landlocked in England is essentially impossible. The sea is not a distant idea you visit on holiday. It is a constant, close, surrounding fact of life, always just over there, just past the next few hills. It is why a country this small produced this many sailors, this many ports, this many fishermen. When the water is never more than an hour away, the water becomes part of who you are. Fact 6. Ben Nevis is the UK's highest peak at 1,345 meters, but it is not what it looks like from the bottom. It is the wrecked remnant of a collapsed volcanic caldera. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the original volcano erupted violently, emptied out its magma chamber, and the roof of that empty chamber caved in on itself. What you climb today is what was left behind after that collapse, and then after roughly 400 million years of rain, ice, and wind grinding it down. Ben Nevis is not a summit that was pushed up. It is a scar. The mountain is the wound left where a volcano died. That is the shape of the land. Now look at the edge of it, because the coastline is a completely different kind of enormous. Fact 7. The United Kingdom's total coastline measures about 12,429 kilometers. That is more than double the straight-line distance from London to New York. And that is just the total. Break out Scotland alone. Traced along its deep-sea locks and its shredded island edges, Scotland's coastline runs to roughly 18,743 kilometers. longer than the coastlines of France and Germany combined. A country smaller than Oregon holds more edge than two of the largest nations in Western Europe put together. The land is small. The border between land and sea is gigantic. Fact 8. The UK contains over 6,000 islands. The vast majority are uninhabited rocks, but they are real, named, mapped land. Scotland alone accounts for roughly 790 of them, and about 130 of those are permanently inhabited. The Orkney and Shetland archipelagos, the Western Isles, and hundreds of smaller outcrops scattered around the coast add up to a genuinely island-dense nation, not one landmass with a couple of stragglers off the end, but an actual scatter of hundreds of inhabited and uninhabited pieces. Fact 9. The Bristol Channel has the second largest tidal range on the entire planet. At Avonmouth, the mean spring tidal range reaches 12.3 meters. That is about 40 feet of vertical water. The difference between low tide and high tide is taller than a 3-story building. The only place on Earth that beats it is the Bay of Fundy in Canada. And where the Bristol Channel funnels down into the River Severn, it holds the record for the highest tidal range anywhere in Europe. 40 feet of water, rising and falling twice a day. Water moving on that scale does not just sit politely behind a harbor wall. Fact 10. That enormous tidal range is what creates the Severn bore. When the Bristol Channel tide comes surging in, it gets forced into a narrower and narrower funnel as it meets the River Severn. The water has nowhere left to go except forward and upward, so it climbs onto itself and travels upstream against the river as a single moving wave. On the biggest tides, that bore can reach 2 meters high and travel at over 20 kilometers an hour. And here is the part nobody expects. Surfers paddle out to meet it, catch it, and ride it inland upstream for several miles. A surfable wave, rolling the wrong way up an English river on a schedule. That is the wave the hook promised you. Fact 11. The English Channel narrows to just 33.3 kilometers between Dover and Calais. On a clear day, you can stand on the white cliffs and see France with your naked eye, another country, right there on the horizon. These two nations have fought over that thin strip of water, dug a tunnel beneath it, and for most of recorded European history treated it as both a wall and a doorway at the same time. It is one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth, and it is far, far closer than most people ever picture. Fact 12. The UK is not sitting in one sea. It is surrounded by 4 named bodies of water plus the open Atlantic. The North Sea to the east, the Irish Sea to the west, the Celtic Sea to the southwest, the English Channel to the south. The country sits right at the junction where all of them meet. That position, a crossroads of seas, is a huge part of why it became a maritime power in the first place. When every direction is water and every water leads somewhere, you either learn to sail or you stay small. That is the water on top. What is underneath it is even stranger because the ground itself is almost unbelievably old. Fact 13. Rocks found in northwest Scotland and the Outer Hebrides, known as Lewisian gneiss, are about 3 billion years old. Let that sit against the age of the planet. Earth itself is about 4.6 billion years old. So this rock formed when the planet was barely 1.5 billion years into its whole existence, already ancient, and this was long, long before any complex animal life appeared anywhere. Fact 14. To feel how old that is, line it up against life. Complex multicellular life did not emerge until roughly 600 million years ago, which means the Lewisian gneiss is nearly 5 times older than the very first animals. Pick up a piece of that gneiss on a beach in the Outer Hebrides, and you are holding something that formed before there were any animals on Earth at all. Before fish, before insects, before leaves, before any living thing with more than one cell had left a single mark in the fossil record. That rock existed when the oceans held nothing but single-celled organisms, and the sky had almost no oxygen in it. And it is still just lying there on a Scottish beach, where anyone can walk up and put a hand on it. Fact 15. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland is made of about 40,000 interlocking basalt columns. Each one is a near-perfect polygon, mostly hexagons, packed edge to edge. They formed about 60 million years ago, when a volcanic fissure erupted and produced lava that cooled slowly and contracted, cracking into these clean geometric shapes as it shrank. The columns fit together so precisely and look so deliberately regular that for centuries people were certain they had been cut and set by hand, by giants, by gods, by someone. But no one placed them. That is simply what basalt does when it cools under exactly the right conditions. The lava contracts as it loses heat, cracks form, and the cracks spread into the tightest shape that fills a plane, the hexagon. Bees find it, Basalt finds it. It is the ground solving a geometry problem on its own 40,000 times over. Geometry straight out of the earth with no hand involved at all. Fact 16. The white cliffs of Dover are made almost entirely of the compressed bodies of microscopic sea creatures. That bright white chalk is built from the shells of coccoliths, single-celled algae that lived in a warm, shallow sea covering this part of the world between about 70 and 100 million years ago. Every individual shell is microscopic. What looks from a ferry like solid white stone is actually billions upon billions of tiny shells crushed together into rock. The cliffs are not really a geological feature at all. They are a biological one. That entire white wall was once alive. Fact 17. The Scottish Highlands were once as tall as the Himalayas are today. Around 400 million years ago, a slow-motion collision of tectonic plates threw up a mountain range on a scale to rival anything standing on Earth right now. Then time went to work. Ice, rain, and wind spent hundreds of millions of years grinding those peaks down. The worn stumps that remain, Ben Nevis among them, are some of the most ancient landforms in all of Europe. And here is the scale of it. The Himalayas are about 50 million years old. The Scottish mountains they once resembled are roughly 8 times older. You are looking at the roots of mountains that were already old when the Himalayas had not even begun. Fact 18. Dorset's Jurassic Coast is a 95-mile stretch of cliff that compresses 185 million years of geological time into one continuous walk. Start at one end in Triassic rock and walk east, and as you walk, you move forward through the Jurassic and then the Cretaceous, each layer holding the fossils of the creatures that were alive when that rock was forming. Dinosaur footprints, ammonites, and ichthyosaur bones come out of these cliffs on a regular basis. Not in a museum, but in the raw rock, worked loose by the same sea that keeps eroding the cliff face and exposing more. Most of the timeline of the Mesozoic era, the whole age of the dinosaurs from beginning to end, is right there, laid out in order readable from a coastal footpath. You do not dig for it. You just walk, and the deeper into the walk you go, the further forward in time you travel. 185 million years told as a stroll along the beach. That is the rock. Now watch what that rock does to the sky above it, because the UK's weather flatly refuses to obey its own latitude. Fact 19. Line the United Kingdom up on a globe with the part of Canada at the same latitude, and you land on Hudson Bay, an area that freezes solid for 5 to 6 months of every year. The UK does not share that fate. And the reason is the Gulf Stream, a powerful ocean current that carries warm water up from the Gulf of Mexico, northeast across the Atlantic, and pushes it right along the western edge of Europe. That current keeps UK winters somewhere between 5 and 11 degrees Celsius warmer than the latitude alone would ever allow. The whole country is being heated by a river inside the sea. Fact 20. Because of that warming, palm trees grow outdoors in Scotland with no protection at all. They grow in gardens along the west coast near Oban, on the Isles of Scilly off Cornwall, and in several spots across the Hebridean Islands. These are not fragile greenhouse specimens. They are planted in the open ground and left outside straight through winter. And remember where that is. Scotland sits at the same latitude as parts of Labrador in Canada, where the average January temperature drops below -20 degrees Celsius. Same distance from the North Pole. One has palm trees swaying by the shore. The other has months of deep freeze and frozen ground. And the only thing standing between those two fates is a current of warm water flowing up from the Gulf of Mexico. Take that current away, and Scotland's palm trees die the same winter. The Gulf Stream is the entire difference. That is the palm tree promise from the very start of this video, and it is completely real. Fact 21. Here is one that breaks the UK's own reputation. London gets about 600 millimeters of rain per year. Compare that, Rome gets about 800. New York gets about 1,200. Miami gets about 1,500. Cities people associate with sunshine are far wetter than London. The UK's soggy reputation comes from the frequency of grey drizzle, not the actual volume of water. It drizzles often. The sky stays overcast for long stretches. But the total rainfall in London is lower than most of the European and American cities people picture as sunny. It is not that it rains a lot. It is that it is grey a lot. Fact 22. On the 19th of July 2022, the UK recorded a temperature of 40.3 degrees Celsius at Coningsby in Lincolnshire. That was the first time in recorded history that the temperature anywhere in the UK had reached 40 degrees. Met Office records go all the way back to the 1770s, and they had never once shown anything like it. The heat buckled road surfaces. It warped train tracks until trains had to slow to a crawl. It pushed parts of the national power grid to the edge. Homes built to trap warmth, with small windows and thick insulation and no air conditioning anywhere, turned into ovens. And the reason the whole country struggled is simple. It was never built for that heat, because in 250 years of record-keeping, it had never once needed to be. A place engineered for its entire history to hold heat and suddenly needed to let heat out, and it could not. Scotland, meanwhile, had no such problem. Scotland had the opposite problem entirely. Fact 23. Ben Nevis up in the Scottish Highlands averages over 4,000 millimeters of rainfall a year. That is nearly 7 times London's annual total in the same country. And the split is brutal. At the very same time that parts of southeast England can be under official water stress designations, Ben Nevis and the hills around it are soaked through. The rain does not fall evenly across the UK. It falls almost entirely on the west, piling up against the mountains that catch it and leaving the east comparatively dry. One small country and one side of it is a rainforest while the other is running short of water. Fact 24. Shetland, the most northerly part of the UK at 60 degrees north, averages about +3 degrees Celsius in January. Now go to Labrador City in Canada, which sits at a similar latitude, and its January average is about -24 degrees Celsius. That is a 27-degree gap between two places roughly the same distance from the North Pole. 27 degrees. The only real variable between them is whether the Gulf Stream passes nearby. Shetland is not warm by anyone's standard, but it is 27 degrees warmer than it has any geographical right to be. That is the physical country, the size, the sea, the rock, the impossible weather. Now the history built on top of it, which is older than most people ever bother to check. Fact 25. Stonehenge's earliest construction phase began around 3000 BCE. The Great Pyramid of Giza was not completed until about 2560 BCE. Do the subtraction. Stonehenge predates the most famous structure in the ancient world by roughly 440 years. When Egyptian builders were hauling limestone across the desert to raise the pyramids, Stonehenge had already been standing for nearly half a millennium. Almost everyone knows Stonehenge is ancient. Almost nobody stops to check that it is older than the pyramids. It is. Fact 26. London was founded by the Romans as Londinium around 43 AD. Within a single generation, it had grown into a serious settlement, a bridge across the Thames, a forum, an amphitheater, defensive walls. When the Roman Empire fell, the city shrank, but it never actually disappeared. Through the Saxons, the Vikings, the Normans, the plagues, the fires, and the wars, people kept living on that same bend in the river. It has been continuously lived in and continuously important for close to 2,000 years without a single break. And there is a ghost of Rome still buried in the modern map. The financial district, the city of London, still roughly follows the boundary of those original Roman walls. 2,000 years later, the richest square mile in the country still sits inside the outline the Romans first traced. The money moves today along a line the Romans drew. Fact 27. Magna Carta was sealed in 1215. It was the first formal document in European history to put legally binding limits on the power of a king. Under pressure from his rebellious barons, King John agreed that even the king was subject to the law. That single principle, that no one is above the law, not even the person at the very top, became the seed of constitutional government as it developed over the following centuries. And its reach is long. The United States Constitution was written 571 years later, and Magna Carta is one of the documents it drew from. An agreement forced out of an English king in a field in 1215 still echoes in how much of the world is governed. Fact 28. At its peak in 1920, the British Empire covered about 35.5 million square kilometers, roughly 24% of the entire land surface of the Earth. It governed about 412 million people, around 23% of the world's population at the time. Now put that against the homeland. The entire UK today covers 244,376 square kilometers. At its peak, the empire was 145 times larger than the country running it. One small island, smaller than Oregon, administering a quarter of the planet. Fact 29. That empire was spread so widely that the old boast was literally true. The sun genuinely never set on it. At any given moment during its peak, at least one British territory was in daylight somewhere on Earth. That was not a slogan someone invented. It was a plain consequence of holding land on every continent at once, the Pacific, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, the Americas, so that the planet could never turn far enough to leave all of it in darkness. The phrase became a worn-out cliché so long ago that people forgot it started as a simple, measurable fact. The empire itself is gone, but the institutions it built are still running today. Fact 30. Oxford University has evidence of teaching going back to 1096, and it grew fast after 1167, the year Henry II banned English students from attending the University of Paris, and they came home to Oxford instead. Sit with the timeline. By the time Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, Oxford was already about 300 years old. When Shakespeare was writing, it was 400 years old. When Australia was colonized, it was 500 years old. It has run continuously for roughly 9 centuries, which makes it the oldest university in the entire English-speaking world. Students have been walking to lectures there since before the Magna Carta was sealed. Fact 31. Westminster Abbey has hosted the coronation of every English and British monarch since William the Conqueror in 1066, with only 2 exceptions. Edward V was murdered in the Tower of London before he could be crowned. Edward VIII abdicated before his coronation could take place. Every other monarch, for nearly 960 years, has been crowned in that same building. And there is a piece of continuity inside it that is almost absurd. The chair used in those coronations contains a block of sandstone called the Stone of Destiny, and that stone has been part of the ceremony since 1308. The same rock under the same ritual for over 700 years. That is 31. 13 facts remain, and they cover what this country still controls, still creates, and still contains right now today. Fact 32. The British pound sterling is the world's oldest currency still in continuous use. It dates back to about 760 AD in the Anglo-Saxon period, which makes it roughly 1,264 years old. Here is how deep that goes. When the Norman conquest happened in 1066, the pound was already over 300 years old. The euro is 25 years old. The US dollar has existed since 1792. The pound was already a working, spendable currency when Charlemagne was ruling the Frankish Empire. That is the pre-Norman money the hook promised you, and it is still in your pocket. Fact 33. Every person on Earth sets their clock relative to a line drawn through Greenwich in southeast London. Greenwich Mean Time became the global standard in 1884 at the International Meridian Conference, where 25 countries voted to make the Greenwich Meridian the prime meridian, 0 degrees longitude. Every time zone in the world is now defined as some number of hours ahead of or behind that line, which means the entire planet system for coordinating time is anchored to a quiet London suburb that most people outside of Britain have never even heard of. The whole world checks the time against a neighborhood. Fact 34. The City of London, the small financial district, just 1.1 square miles, processes over £2.5 trillion in foreign exchange transactions every single day. About 500,000 people commute into that 1 square mile every working day. It consistently ranks alongside New York as one of the 2 most important financial centers on the planet. The activity generated inside that tiny patch of ground moves currency values, interest rates, and investment flows across every continent. Deals struck on those few streets change the price of things in countries the traders will never visit. A little over 1 square mile, smaller than many single farms, quietly setting prices for the entire world. That is the financial machinery. But some of what this island produced, it simply gave away for free. Fact 35. Tim Berners-Lee, a British computer scientist, invented the World Wide Web in 1989 while working at CERN in Switzerland. He wrote the original proposal. He built the first browser. He wrote the first web page. He created the core protocols the web still runs on today. And then came the decision that shaped the modern world. He was offered enormous sums of money to patent the technology and own it, and he refused. He gave it to the world for free, with no license and no fee. Every website that has ever existed, every page you have ever loaded, exists because one man chose to give his invention away. Fact 36. The rules of at least 10 major global sports were first written in Britain. Association football had its codified rules written in London in 1863. Rugby was formalized at Rugby School in 1823. Cricket's first laws were written in 1744. Lawn tennis was invented in 1874. Golf's written rules date to 1744 at St. Andrews. Badminton was named after Badminton House in Gloucestershire. Table tennis, boxing under the Queensberry rules, snooker, and modern competitive rowing all trace their formal rulebooks to Britain as well. Think about what that means the next time a World Cup fills a stadium in Brazil, or a cricket match stops an entire city in India, or a tennis final plays out in Australia. Billions of people on every continent are playing games whose rules were first written down on one small, cold island in the North Atlantic. No other country on Earth wrote the rulebook for more of the sports the world actually plays. That is the sports rulebook promise from the hook, and it is not close. Fact 37. The Bank of England was founded in 1694. It was one of the world's first central banks. It introduced the idea of paper banknotes as a stored, government-backed value, and it developed the concept of a national debt as a deliberate financial instrument, a tool rather than a sign of failure. The mechanisms it built for monetary policy, for issuing bonds, for managing a currency, became the templates that central banks all across Europe, and eventually the world, were built to copy. Most modern economies are still, to this day, running on systems the Bank of England first designed over 300 years ago. 7 facts remain, and these last 7 are not about institutions or infrastructure. They are about what it actually sounds like and looks like to live inside this country. Fact 38. The UK is 4 countries under one government. England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland each have their own distinct history, their own legal traditions, and their own cultural identity. Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland each have devolved parliaments or assemblies with real legislative power. So the laws that actually govern you can change depending on which of the 4 nations you happen to be standing in. Treating them as one single, uniform place is something residents of all 4 will correct you on quickly and firmly. It is not one country wearing 4 names. It is 4 countries sharing one state. Fact 39. Welsh has been spoken in Britain for longer than English has. It descends directly from the Brittonic language of the original British population, spoken before the Romans arrived, and long before the Anglo-Saxons brought English across the sea in the 5th century. About 582,000 people in Wales speak Welsh today, roughly 18% of the population, and every single road sign in Wales carries both languages, side by side. That is a language in continuous daily living use on the same land for over 2,500 years. Empires came and went. The Romans arrived and left. The Anglo-Saxons arrived and stayed. And underneath all of it, in the hills and valleys of Wales, people kept speaking the old tongue generation after generation without stopping. English is the newcomer here. Welsh was already home when English first stepped off the boat. Fact 40. Cornish, a language closely related to Welsh, was effectively extinct by the late 18th century. Dolly Pentreath, often named as the last native speaker, died in 1777. That looked like the end of it, a language gone, closed, finished. But then something rare happened. The language was reconstructed painstakingly from historical texts, old dictionaries, and surviving documents, and a revival movement took hold. There are now several hundred fluent Cornish speakers and several thousand more learning it. A language that was dead for nearly 2 centuries is now being taught to children in Cornwall. It came back from the grave. Fact 41. Scottish Gaelic arrived in Scotland from Ireland around 500 AD, and it has never left. Today, somewhere between 57,000 and 60,000 people speak it, mostly across the Highlands and the Western Isles. It is taught in some Scottish schools. It has its own BBC television channel, and it remains the everyday living language of a real community out in the Outer Hebrides. And here is the quiet thread that ties this whole video together. Those are the very same islands where the 3-billion-year-old rocks sit out on the beach. On one shore, the oldest rock in Europe, living on it, one of its oldest surviving languages. Fact 42. Greater London has over 300 languages spoken within its boundaries. More distinct languages in active daily use than any other city on the entire planet. According to the 2021 census, about 40% of Greater London's population identified as white British, with the rest spread across more than 100 different ethnic backgrounds. Think about the loop that closes there. The city that once ran a global empire that reached out and touched a quarter of the world is now home to people from almost every part of the world that empire once reached. The map went out, and then over a century it came back home and moved in. Fact 43. The United Kingdom has a denser patchwork of regional English dialects per square mile than any other English-speaking country on Earth. Linguists have documented over 40 distinct varieties of spoken English inside a landmass smaller than Oregon. A person from Newcastle speaks Geordie. Someone from Liverpool speaks Scouse. Birmingham has Brummie. East London has Cockney. Glasgow has its own dialect of Scots English that a speaker from Kent might genuinely struggle to follow. Drive for 30 minutes in some parts of the country and the accent in the next town over is measurably, audibly different from the one you just left. The island is small. The number of ways to speak on it is enormous. Fact 44, and here is where all of it lands. Despite covering less ground than the state of Oregon, the United Kingdom has produced over 130 Nobel Prize winners, the third highest total in the world, behind only the United States and Germany. It holds 33 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, running from Stonehenge and Hadrian's Wall to the Giant's Causeway, the Tower of London, and the Georgian architecture of Bath. A country of 67 million people, on an island smaller than Oregon, has contributed more to global science, literature, and the physical record of human achievement than almost any other country that has ever existed. So look at that map one more time. It shows you a small island off the coast of Europe, and it hides everything that matters. It does not show you that the ground is older than animals. It does not show you a currency older than the Norman conquest, or a coastline longer than France and Germany combined, or languages that were being spoken there before English existed, or a wave you can surf inland, or the fact that the whole planet checks the time against one of its suburbs. The UK is not small. It is dense, packed with deep time, packed with living history, packed with systems that still quietly set the rules for the rest of the world. The map was never going to tell you that. Now you know, and if this is the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video goes region by region across this same island, and the same impossible density is hiding everywhere you look. The map is still hiding things. We are just getting started.